you're in a studio and you've got people and animals and props and everything feels very three-dimensional, but by the time you've taken the photograph and presented it in its final platform in an exhibition, it's just this flat print, you know, that's framed, and it feels as though it's lost all its dimensions. So I always tried to build sculptural qualities into the photograph, and one of those techniques was to use these plain backgrounds, so there's space almost for the viewer to enter the work and circulate the subjects as you would a sculpture. And a lot of the people I photograph are also from the bust up, so they kind of resemble sculptural busts as well. So you could say that I'm quite influenced by classical sculpture in that respect. So a lot of the women I photograph, they usually have their eyes closed or their gaze is diverted away. They're quite anonymous looking. It's not really portraiture in the sense that I'm interested to reveal some truth about the person I'm photographing. They almost become like avatars, or it's mostly their interior or their psychological landscape that I'm interested in presenting. So I think having the eyes turned away or inward is a way to access that space. The subverted gaze or the turned away gaze is not really to be associated with the male gaze, you know, the history of the male gaze we see in, you know, film and photography. It's more about giving people, I tried to allow space for people to go inward so that this can come through in the photographs. It's about their private space. So often when I'm photographing people, or some people, I'll ask them to sit in certain poses or sit for a while before I take photographs, so that I can, I'm always trying to make people drop their self-consciousness of the camera, which is actually, as you would all know, very difficult to take a photograph of someone and for them not to be aware of your camera or the photographic process. So there's a psychological space that I would like to achieve where all self-consciousness is dropped in a way, and you know, alluding to their interior landscape as well, or their psyche. I guess the space around them, or the space within which the photographs are taken, I try to make it a space that's somehow between real and illusion. So the people are very real and the animals are very real, and I like them to look very real. But there's also a sense of the ephemeral or illusionary space, a space that kind of feels like a void or a vacuum. It's not really connected to any particular period in time. So in that respect, I often choose clothing that's very plain or doesn't really identify with any particular era in time, if that makes sense. So they're kind of suspended in this void, photographic void or vacuum, and they're surrounded by a lot of space so that we can kind of examine them, I guess. So it's not really that fast, decisive moment that I'm interested in relation to photography. It's more about slowing down time or suspending time so that what's in front of my lens can be meditated upon or examined or magnified. So that sense of time in photography is something that I find really interesting, this fastness of time or slowness of time, and photography's connection to it. So mostly this is photographic work. There's a couple of videos just while I'm talking about the slowing down of time. I will stop that share for a second. So I just made a couple of video works using a high-speed video camera. So we know that most video is shot at 25 frames per second. And when you use a high-speed camera, you have the possibility of creating an extreme slow motion effect. So this is just one of the videos that I made. I hope it, let me know if you can't see that for some reason. So this, in real life, it's just a few fleeting seconds, and whilst it could look beautiful in real, the butterflies actually, the butterfly's legs are stuck on the woman's lip gloss, but it was only for sorry. It was only.
We can't see a video.
Oh, sorry. Hold on a sec. Thank you for, that's because I'm not sharing. Thank you. How's that?
Yes.
So yeah, it's just, this is actually just a few seconds, but because it was shot at 1000 or 2000 frames per second, it becomes quite painful to watch, and the slowing down of time. So it should be kind of simultaneously appealing but also repellent at the same time, and the slow motion makes it feel very slow and sluggish and heavy. And I was just interested in how something which could look quite beautiful in a few seconds can become quite menacing or dark when the time is slowed down like that. So that is, so the video works are just very photographic. They're like a stretched out photograph. Here's another one. This one isn't as slow as the previous one I just showed you. So yeah, the few video works I've made are just about exploring the photographic moment and slowing it down and seeing what happens with all that information once it's stretched out and slowed down. There's not, with my works, there's no real clear narrative or sort of, you could say, message that I'm trying to impart. I'm after more of an enigmatic or ambiguous sort of feel. And this is the part that I find, you know, I love photography, but the camera is quite a tricky tool to use if you're trying to represent something that's perhaps metaphysical or spiritual, or a person's psyche or their interior space, which is quite an ephemeral thing. Yet you have this camera, which is this device that by its nature, it makes things look a lot more exaggerated or a bit more contrived than they actually are. So there's always this fine line where I'm trying to make things look real, but at the same time exploring a psychological space or sometimes something metaphysical or spiritual. One inquiry that I'm always quite interested in is looking at the difference between the lightness of our spirits, our human spirit, and the heaviness of our bodies. So there's kind of always, the women I photograph often look like they're ghosts or somewhere between a ghost and a hard marble sculpture. So yeah, for that reason, I love photography, but I also find it really challenging to represent these ideas through the use of a camera. What is not always apparent is that all my images are shot on film. So since I started shooting, I've always shot on a medium format Hasselblad camera, and also I have a 4x5 Linhof camera. So for me, my practice has always been an analog one. So once I shoot on film, then I scan at high resolution the frames I'm interested in working on, and then I'll finish them in Photoshop. But a lot of this, the kind of light and pared back aesthetic is done with my studio lighting. And then once the film is scanned, I'm just trying to, you know, bring the color and everything back to how it looked in my Polaroids. So I think it's I continue to shoot on film and often ask myself why, because I've tried to, experiment and shoot with digital and certainly would shoot other things with digital, but there's something about an analog practice that's really important to how I make my work. It's the way that I started to make work 15 years ago, and it's important for me to keep that same process happening. So I think, if I'm shooting on film, I might take a couple of Polaroids to check everything's looking okay. But then as I'm shooting, I can't really see what the results are, as you can, when you have a digital camera. And I guess the creative process remains a little bit more in the head, or it's more ephemeral, and the decisions I'm making as I'm shooting aren't based on the results I'm seeing immediately. And I find for my process, it works better shooting on film. There's also, for me, I guess a lot of the ideas I'm exploring are quite ephemeral, and to have a analog film practice makes it feel more heavier, if that makes sense, and more tactile. The exhibition prints are usually quite large, and whilst it's hard to see on a computer screen, but in print, I really enjoy seeing the film grain and the details that I'm familiar with from shooting on film. So that was all I was going to say about film. But it is a question I ask myself a lot, because it would obviously be easier for me to shoot digitally and cheaper. Why would I continue to shoot analog? And so I'm always asking, myself that question. So what does it mean to me to be an analog photographer today, and why would I still continue despite the expense and it seems a bit more laborious now, whereas you obviously never felt as laborious prior to digital. Why would I continue to shoot on film? So one of the recurring things in my work, which I've always looked at, might be the human animal or the female animal connection. The animals that I portray in the images usually have some kind of symbolic significance in relation to, you can see my PowerPoint presentation, can't you, Doros?
Yes, it's fine. It's fine. Yes.
It's flicking through the image. Okay, I wasn't sure what screen I was on. The animals normally have some kind of spiritual significance in relation to religion, mythology, folklore. So the animals are like wolves or owls or snakes or birds or butterflies. They have a lot of loaded symbolism, or a lot of, stories amongst different cultures in relation to folklore and mythology. And I think a lot of artists often use metaphors of animals to help make sense of their psyche or their interior worlds. It's said that we turn towards the animal in a way to help understand what human identity is, by comparing ourselves to the other creatures that we share the earth with. So we evolved from chimpanzees, obviously, sharing 98% DNA, and there's no clear point in history where the human being is said to have emerged. It was just like obviously a very slow, gradual process from transition from ape to human. So it's said that humans have this very, they're haunted by this memory of being animal. It's a very archaic memory, but it haunts, but also fascinates us. And so we try to resolve this human animal binary by casting animals, in our art, in our film, in our fairy tales, in our dances, in our performances, in our earliest cave paintings, in a way to trace the boundaries between what is human and what is animal. So that space between what is human and what is animal has always fascinated me, and where does the animal end and the human begin? But also I seem to recruit animals, I think I did intuitively, as a way of exploring psyche also. So perhaps the animals are stand-in for aspects of psyche we don't understand, or to look at the divide between self and other. Also, it's said that human beings live from their interior. So our world is just our interior mind projected outwards, whereas animals are said to live on the surface of things. So they're kind of, I guess they're more present, and animals are said to exist outside the human construct of time. So time is a human construct, and then animals exist outside of time. They live on the surface. So I like that, because I'm interested in time in photography, in pairing humans and animals together to look at the difference of the perception of time. Mhm. So, yeah, I can just talk about some of the animals that feature in my images. There's a lot of snakes, and obviously we know the serpent or the snake is one of the earliest mythological symbols across all cultures. It can be found, and this is prior to the Abrahamic religions or the Christianity, where the snake was then cast in more of a evil role. So prior to that, it represented a primeval cosmic force linked with eternity and regeneration due to the shedding of the snake's skin. And snakes also symbolize fertility, rebirth, poison, and medicine. That video which I showed you earlier of the green snake circulating that vase, that's titled Ouroboros, and that's based on the ancient Egyptian symbol depicting a snake eating its own tail, used to symbolize the cycle of creation through destruction. It also symbolizes the dual nature of existence, a symbol of the eternal return and eternity. And it was also a symbol that was then later on adopted by the alchemists. So that video was also just this exploration between spirit and stone, the contrast between the breathing snakes and the motionless vase. There's a lot of wolf-like looking dogs in the images. And so we know the wolf is a common motif in mythologies. It's associated with danger and destruction due to its predatory nature. It's also featured a lot in fairy tales. There's a lot of fairy tale symbolism that's associated with the wolf. So in some of these images, the women appear more or less in a harmonious relationship with the wolf. So it's kind of, I'm trying to flip the traditional fairy tale narrative where the wolf is a predator and the female is a prey. Here they're more seen in a harmonious, ambiguous situation. And yeah, so I look at a lot of fairy tales as well. And in fairy tales, it's primarily the girls and women who go through the most extreme transformations and rites of passage. And these often involve shifting forms between human and animal states, or gaining wisdom through animal helpers and guides. So I do look at a lot of fairy tales as well as myths and art history. Birds in general are metaphors for the soul, but in some of the images, they're kind of symbolic of air. It's as if the bird is breathing life into the person. And often in the images, the animals look more animated than the humans. The humans are the ones that look inanimate, and the animals, particularly the ones with birds, are the ones that have life and air in them. Yeah, so it's the themes that I'm usually looking at are the female-animal connection, and there's also a lot of, I draw upon a lot of representations of women throughout art history and mythology, and there's this kind of ancient reservoir of symbols and myths and fables and archetypes associated with females throughout history, and I do try to draw upon that in a lot of the work. I'm interested in the longevity of symbols and myths over time and how they remain very valid and ingrained over centuries. And you can see ancient fairy tales and archetypal myths played out in, contemporary television series like Game of Thrones or any of the, vampire genre. And I find that quite interesting, that these long-lived myths that we reinterpret over time. Okay, so that's me talking about my work. I was wondering if Doris, you had any questions, or if anyone did.
Yeah, let's first of all, I would like to thank you for very, very interesting and an insight into your work and methodology. Let's hear if we have any comments or questions.
I would like to congratulate you on your presentation. Your work is really amazing. I just have a question because your photographs are very bright, and yet they have all the detail that one needs to see.
Mm-hmm.
I personally like overexposed photographs, but in overexposing, I lose detail. And I see that you have all the detail. So the question is, do you use a low contrast setting, or is it your post-processing that is delivering this detail on these bright photographs? Because I find them really amazing, but I cannot get the same result.
It is difficult when you have light, bright images to retain the detail. It's true. So when I'm taking the photographs, I'm always aiming not to overexpose. So I guess I use a lot of even lighting, which makes it easier. If there was more contrast in lighting, that could be difficult because I could lose detail in my highlights. So because everything, as you can see, is very evenly lit, then I can do an exposure for the highlights. It covers everything. Then I'll do a high resolution scan. And I must admit, it is tricky once I get to that point in Photoshop to make sure I bring all the detail back. But with the Hasselblad scanner, the Imicon FlexTight scanner, they do very nice scans, and it's possible to have all that detail. But I must make sure that I don't overexpose when I'm taking the exposure, because then I would lose that detail. So if it was an image with like dark and light, it would be very difficult to get that detail in the highlights.
When you're photo measuring, when you use your photometer or intuitively, are you calculating for the high level lighting, or do you take an average?
I calculate for the high level lighting. So yeah, so I have a light meter, and I make sure that you know, because the exposure is the same throughout, because it's all shot in a studio environment, so I can control the exposure a lot. And you can see that it would be the same exposure on the background and on the foreground and on the person and the object. So I can get one exposure that's going to be good for everything. And then, you know, I don't overexpose. I might underexpose a little bit, and then that helps with me to get the details I need. Yeah, but that is, you make a good point. That is the trickiest part, is to, and often you can't really see it on a screen, but in the photographic prints, you can see all the detail in the highlights. And that is the trickiest part with that high key lighting, is to keep detail.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The technicalities is one thing.
Yeah.
Conceptually, your photography is something amazing. The way you photograph people, animals, mythology, fairy tales, you bring everything together, and at such great large prints. It's really amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Can I add to what Varnavas just said about the brightness? I think what is amazing is that you manage to give bright images, but with a darkness in their essence.
Exactly.
And that is I think is something that is very, very rare, very difficult, and something that stirs the soul, if you see what I mean. And I would like to ask you two very short questions before everyone else can join us. You say that you deal with a lot of aspects of our existence, like myths, anima, female, the gaze, and all these. Aren't you tempted to insert or incorporate texts? Because I noticed there are no texts and that go with the photos. Not that I need the texts, and that is another very, very good point about your work. It's like photos, they really do speak. And that's one thing. Are you tempted to use narrative or text, written narrative? And the other question is that I'm curious about your influences.
Yeah, so the text is just the title of the work. So actually, I can show you 1 second. That exhibition that was at the National Gallery of Victoria, they made a, oops, there it is. Wait a second.
I think you have to, yes.
There, I'm still a bit clunky with the Zoom sharing. They made this book, and in the book, they actually paired the images with pieces of Sylvia Plath poetry, which I found that was their decision, but very suitable choice. So, you know, there's not a narrative in her poetry, but and there's not a lot of narrative in my images. They're more ambiguous. So interspersed between some of the pages, I'll just wait till it gets to a page, there were just pieces that they'd chosen from Sylvia Plath poetry. So I found that a very suitable text to accompany the pictures, that type of poetry. Like there, for example, that went a bit fast. And this was a nice accompaniment. So yeah, I don't like there to be a strong narrative, but often the titles of the work allude to something going on there. What you said before, yep.
There are titles to the photographs. Sorry.
Yes, so okay. That's right, and it's not in my PowerPoint, the titles of each photograph. So, for example, yeah, each work has I think that one was called Antidote. So what you talked about before, the light surface of the images in contrast with maybe some of the darker feelings or ideas, was something that I definitely tried to do from the beginning, was to present, you know, eerie or the uncanny or darker ideas, but have a surface that was actually quite light and bright. So there was this contrast between the surface and then the content of the images.
Would you like to explain a little bit the title of the book? I mean, bleached. It's okay. It's understood because they're very bright. They're almost bleached. How about Gothic?
It's exactly in a way. It's what we said. The dark side, the Gothic part of. And they bleached because it was presented as in a bleached or very light manner. But I'm sorry, I leave Petrina to. It's a very an apt title. That's what I wanted to say. It conveys the idea that we spoke about.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's Gothic sensibilities, but the images are very washed out or bleached. That's true. Someone's finding. What was your second question, Doris?
Your influences.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a lot. I'm influenced by lots of things, but you could say classical sculpture has always been a strong influence. And then also kind of work by painters, I guess. I'm thinking of someone like Vermeer, where there's a timelessness or an airlessness to his paintings where time seems suspended. That's something that I've always admired. And also artists that make really singular works, like maybe Brancusi, or, you know, they reduce things down to its essential nature. Louise Bourgeois is an artist who I've always been very fond of, and you know, there's a lot of female artists as well, and particularly ones that might look at mythology or fairy tales or symbolism. I find really interesting also. So
that your influences are more are not that photographic, let's say.
No, actually they're not. not at all. But yeah.
We have a comment that the work reminds Dean of Magritte.
Yes, I mean, there is a sense of the surreal in there also, isn't there? Which is always a tricky thing to do with photography, isn't it? To represent a surreal or the psyche.
Can I ask or make a comment?
Yes.
First of all, thanks, and may I congratulate you on your work.
Thank you.
And yeah, okay. Doris preceded me with this idea of presenting something with very light colors that is quite. I find it a bit disquieting, and maybe the idea. It is more so because there's a sense of timelessness and actual, not aloofness, almost out of wordliness of these people, that they're like statues, or they convey a sense of unease, or they're impenetrable. Mm-hmm. Which brings talking about influences, or it's not an influence, it's something that I was wanted. Are you aware of the work of Ren Hang, this Chinese because there's, you know, partly some of the images, the construction and the use of animals, although they're quite different in the sense they don't have this, they're more let's say, okay, apart from sensual, or they're more involving in a guttural kind of way than yours. But it's interesting to see, like, if there are any, if you're aware of the work, and if you could comment on that.
I do very much like the work of Ren Hang, and you could say that in his works, time is very fast. It's like a very spontaneous, fast.
He died very quickly. I mean,
he did.
He had a fast life.
He had a fast life, and you can see that in his photographs. So I think we do explore similar subject matter, but then my time is slow and his time is fast. Like everything, you can feel the fastness of everything in his photographs, which I really like and admire, that he can capture that. There's an energy or a pulse in his images, and I guess mine are feel a bit, I would say, more lifeless, and his feel more alive.
More cerebral. Yours are more,
yeah,
in a way.
Yeah. But I think you said the word impenetrable, and that's also true in that I want you to be able to look at these people and you can see all the details in them, but because they exist in their interior landscape or the interior psyche, you can't know them, or you can never know who they are. There's an aloofness to them that you can't. It's like their private space, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
So it's all contained within.
Okay.
Petrina, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Do you do any photography outside the studio, like
No.
street photography or
Yeah.
landscape or cityscape or something else?
No,
Or
I
do you
don't. So,
only, pardon me?
no, I don't. I only take the images within, all my images are taken within a controlled studio environment. So for me, that blank background is quite important as this kind of blank canvas to start with. And yeah, so for those reasons, and because I can obviously control the light a lot more when I'm in the studio. Here, actually, this is one example. There are some times where I have to shoot outdoors, but I'll use my studio lighting because this was at the person's house that they had hybrid wolves. So there are some situations where I do shoot on location, but then I'll take my own backdrop with me and try to create the studio situation, but outdoors, if that makes sense.
Okay, that
So,
makes sense.
yeah, I'm interested in controlling the environment as much as I can. So if I'm shooting outdoors, that becomes difficult to control.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
I can say something. Just some thoughts, if you want to comment on them. I find that there are many components of your work that others, previous people just talked about, such as brightness. I would add the stillness or in the images, the reference to the classical and or the Renaissance setups or way you set your subject together with the reference to the animals that have been symbolic to goddesses and they are found in myths. In juxtaposition or in combination, I should say, with some images that are very, very contemporary, like the women with the glasses, which also have the stillness and the brightness. It makes it all look very sculptural and also very narrative in that stillness, in a way which to me, it makes your images another myth. It's like you put the old myths in a contemporary setup. And it's almost, I feel like you're almost telling us this relationship of animals and women or people and their more natural state is still existing in our contemporary world. I mean, this is what I get from your work, actually. And I think the stillness and the brightness is what makes them very, like they froze in time. There is a very frozen time in your work that makes it very diachronico. It's like it's continuing.
Timeless.
Timeless, yeah. It makes the work timeless, and the theme. It's like you bring a timeless theme and you in a timeless way of representing it. So I just wanted to say that. I don't know if you want to comment on it, but these are the thoughts that I get and feelings I get from your work.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. All those points that you made, and I can see that definitely that the images look frozen in time. So yeah, it's almost like I try to create a vacuum or a void in which these myths exist, and it's timeless because it's not. They do look quite contemporary, but it's still not connected to any particular point in time. So they should look yeah, a bit timeless. And that idea of time is something that I find really fascinating, particularly in relation to photography. This construct of time and how time can be represented through, through the use of a camera. And yeah, I'm always definitely drawing upon lots of myths or archetypes or fables or fairy tales or mythologies, and then taking out singular points and then, looking at it, I guess, under more of a contemporary lens.
But the way you present them is also a myth as well. It's also like another poem that includes that mythology.
Ah, okay.
This is what I get. And thank you for that, actually, because it makes it very, it connects us also with the past.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? We kind of, it does. It's a way of connecting you to the past and those very old and ancient mythologies, and how they translate in contemporary culture and how they're still valid, and they're quite ingrained, really, aren't they? A lot of those archetypes and myths. Thank you.
We have some questions from the chat. Yorgo says, thank you for a great presentation. The subjects are very carefully selected to convey what you are aiming for through your photos. How do you usually recruit your human subjects? Are they friends, relatives, actors, or people you meet outside? And do you enjoy working with human subjects?
Yeah, so in a lot of the images, actually, there's one friend that I have photographed since the past 15 years. And I'll tell you when her image comes across. And so she actually has albinism. So she's very fair and she's got that very white bleach. That's her there. Her name's Lauren. And so I began taking photographs of her about 15 years ago, and she kind of, whenever I'm thinking through ideas, she always seems like a good person to start working with, because she's very easy to work with, but she's almost like a blank slate. And she also kind of embodies a lot of these qualities that I'm trying to impart in the images, where she's quite, she looks a bit metaphysical, or she's got this enigmatic or ephemeral look to her. So Lauren's one person, and she also looks quite sculptural. And with a lot of the people I photograph, I actually do ask them to hold poses for quite a long time sometimes. So it has to be someone with a certain amount of patience that's happy to just let go, and also let go of their self-awareness or their self-consciousness, which is not always easy. So I tend to look for people that are going to be comfortable to do that in front of the lens. So some people are friends or friends of friends. Occasionally I've recruited actors or models. I think casting is quite difficult with these type of images. It has to be someone that has the right psychological space to be able to be calm and still and let go in front of the camera. And do I enjoy working with humans? Yes, but it's always that often I feel like I'm making a sculpture and I forget that I'm working with a human being. And then this is the difficult part, in that I'm actually working with a real life human being, but I'm sort of treating them almost like a sculpture. And I find that can be quite challenging sometimes too.
Petrina, one more question, if you would, please.
Yes.
I'm wondering about your background, your ancestry, or whether you feel that your background or has anything to do with your attitude towards myths, fairy tales, this kind of approach that you're trying to bring up through your photography.
you could say that I look at a lot of, you know, the history of Western art and the portrayal of the female in Western art. My background, you could say, is English and German and Irish. So there's that real kind of, yeah. And the interest in myths and fairy tales and fables has been, you know, with me prior to my interest in photography. That's quite a long interest as well. Like I was researching fairy tales and fables and mythology and archetypes and the writings of Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell, you know, a long time before I became, you know, interested in photography. So this plays out, I think, strongly across the work as well.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
We have one more question from the chat. Was Lauren your inspiration for the rest of the albino models, human and animals?
Yeah, I think because I started to work with Lauren and was very much interested in this idea of presenting her. I think the earliest images of her are just those plain ones where, see if I can find them. Oh, here. These were taken of Lauren about 15, 16 years ago, where I was interested in the sculptural qualities of photography. And then from there on, I always, you know, I'm interested in, as I said before, the lightness of our spirits in comparison to the heaviness of our bodies. And we're, you know, humans are always trying to, what's the word? You know, be spiritually high or elevate or reach the divine, but we're in our animal, hard, heavy bodies. And so there's that juxtaposition between the lightness of our spirit and the heaviness of our bodies. So I often try to make people look at something between a sculpture and a ghost. And so with Lauren, her appearance somehow alludes to that. So I was probably then drawn towards other models of a similar appearance. And also to go for this light surface in contrast to the darker ideas. Does that make sense?
Okay. I see there are no more questions. Some people are saying how much they enjoyed the presentation, and I have to agree. And before giving you the final words, I would like to thank you on behalf of Fotodos and everyone. Also, I would like to thank everyone here. I think this was a very, very beautiful presentation, and congratulations. And we hope that we have helped you start your day positively, because we need positivity everywhere in the world.
We do, don't we? Yes, it's a very positive start to the day. So my day is just starting and your day is winding down. Difference of time. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet all of you.
Okay, let's keep in touch. Hopefully we can have more collaborations in the future, Petrina. And thank you everyone for being here, and for the questions, the comments, and for the good words, nice words. I think, Petrina, you can see them in the chat.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and meet all of you.
Thank you, and
okay.
We hope if you ever make it to Cyprus, we'll meet you at Fotodos.
Yes, gosh, that would be great. One day soon. We'll see. But have a good evening and thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
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 Ciao. Bye-bye.